Hey YouTube, I've been making kombucha for a while, and today is the day I'm going to be getting into the second fermentation of the process. Now when I got into the kombucha world, I found that there's very little, if not very difficult instructions to find on YouTube or on the internet as how to do the second fermentation. And I'll be this will be actually a combination of both the first and second, because I'll be making my next batch for the next second brew as I'm doing the bottles for my second fermentation. And the way you can start kombucha, you can either, the best way I found is know somebody who's already has a batch of kombucha going, or that is brewing kombucha. That way you can get a SCOBY from them and some starter juice or starter fluid, or what I just call is the first fermentation liquid, which would be what I have in this jar here. If you don't know anyone that is making kombucha, and you can't get a SCOBY from them, you can go onto Amazon, and I'll leave a link down below in the description, and you can purchase your own SCOBY and what they say is the starter fluid in here, and this is what you're going to start your kombucha with, and these go for about $15 depending on who you're buying it from, but I'll leave a link down below from where I purchased mine. And once you have one SCOBY, and the SCOBY is obviously what you need to make your brew your kombucha here. Once you have one SCOBY, you'll get 2 and 3, so you can have multiple batches going after your first fermentation with your first SCOBY. So let's get into this now. What I'm going to do is this has been sitting for 10 days. After I've made my tea, which I'll show you in a second as well. I'm not one of those connoisseur type guys where everything has to be processed properly, so this is going to be kind of the way I do it and with what I have. So once I take off my cheesecloth, you'll actually smell a very strong odor that something's obviously fermentating. And this is your SCOBY on top. And so what I like to do is obviously clean your hands first, which I did just before I started this video. You're going to reach inside and just grab your SCOBY and pull it out. Now this is where I can show you where I have another SCOBY growing on my first SCOBY because I pulled it out. So here you go, I have 2 SCOBYs, and this one's the top one that has just grown on top of my first one here. So now I can make a third batch if I wanted to, or throw that out. We'll see what happens after this video, what I determine to do, and go from there. So once you're done with pulling out your SCOBY, you're going to need to take out 2 cups for your next batch. And I like to just use this measuring cup here. I take 2 cups out and keep it in a bowl. And now this is what's considered your starter fluid or your starter juice when you buy a SCOBY. That's all it is. It's actually just your first fermentation of the kombucha. So once I have that set aside, now I'm ready to do the next process. And what I'm going to do now is actually get my next batch ready. So what I like to do is actually just use a coffee maker to get the tea going. Now make sure when you're using a coffee maker that you actually take out the coffee filter, rinse it out of the grinds, or it's not going to work. And then what I actually like to do is run the coffee maker with a clean filter just to get any excess coffee out of the lines that might be there. Now while that's brewing over here, I jump back into the second fermentation, which I'm going to start to bottle in here. Now what I'm going to use for flavoring today is going to be blueberries and wild raspberries that we just picked actually a couple days ago. And there's many recipes on the internet. I'm not going to tell you what's the best out there. This is just what I'm doing here. Sometimes I use mangoes, and depending on what I have in the fridge at the moment. So this is what I'm doing today. And what I like to do is typically fill up the bottle about an inch of fruit at the bottom, and then I'll pour in the kombucha juice in here. And the reason you can also add honey if you're not doing fruit, but you need something with sugar so that the yeast of your first brew here can feed off the fruit and start giving you the carbonation that you'd like. So what I'm going to do now is just fill up these bottles now, and I'll be right back. Alright, after you've filled up all your bottles, and what I like to use is either crushed or pureed fruit, not chopped. And the reason I don't like it chopped is because I find when you're drinking your kombucha that the fruit doesn't come out of the nozzle as nice, and they usually get stuck and you end up shaking it all out anyways. So that's what I do. So in the time that it takes me to fill up my bottles, and again, when it comes to bottles, I use both plastic and glass. And these are obviously, if you recognize them, they're from Costco, and I use them both and have no issues with them. So that being said, like I was saying, in the time that it takes me to fill up my bottles here, the coffee maker is done giving me the hot water that I need to make my next batch. And what I have here is 16 grams of black tea, obviously, and 1 cup of sugar. So now what I like to do is pour all of these 2 ingredients into the container here, and I let that steep for 10 minutes. Alright, now that I have all those ingredients in there, I let it steep for 10 minutes. Basically, you're making a sweet tea. And once it's finished steeping, I strain it out with a cheesecloth. So I'll let that sit here while I move on to this process. Now what I want to do is take the juice that I have here from my first fermentation and add it to the bottles there. However, when you do take the SCOBY out, it does lose a little bit of film in there because it is an actual live culture. It does leave a little bit of a film in there. So what I like to do is, before I put them in a bottle, is strain this out with a cheesecloth. And typically what I'll use is my shaker cup that I can't find at the moment. Alright, now that I found my shaker cup, I like to place this in here. This will usually give me about 2 bottles or so filled up, or close to 2 bottles, should I say. So I just tuck that in there like that and start straining the juice. Or I'm not sure if you can see on here, there is a little bit of crud that does get filtered out with the cheesecloth. If you want a little bit of a better filtration, just double this one up, fold it up. So once I have that filtered out into my shaker cup, I simply pour it into my bottles and leave a little bit of an air gap there so that the carbonation can build up. Alright, I'm not sure if you can see that, but I have a little bit of air space left in there, and as I was pouring this in there, you can actually hear the kombucha starting to carbonate without me even adding the fruit. So what I do from here is I just add the lid on. Some guys will tell you that they'll burp their kombucha every day, and all that means is you just let the air out by twisting the cap open and closing it back up. So I like to just leave it like this for about 3-4 days on top of the fridge, and then after 3 or 4 days, then I'll give it a try, see how much carbonation is in there, just with 1 bottle. And if there's enough, then I'll start putting them in the fridge and start drinking them from there. So I'm going to finish up pouring this kombucha into the bottles, and I will show you what I do with the tea after it's finished steep. Alright, now that you've had all your bottles filled up, I got 7 out of mine. I did have a little bit left over, however it's not going to fill up 1 whole bottle, and I'll just leave it in the jar and just put it into my next batch. Once you have them on, make sure your lids are on tight. They don't have to be any fancy lids. I just make sure that they're tight, and so that no air releases out. And I put them somewhere at room temperature for about 4 or 5 days, or 3 to 4 days, depending on how much carbonation you'd want. And then put them in the fridge. Now after this point, I go back to the tea that I made here and get my next batch ready to go for the next 10 days of the first fermentation. And this is basically what you do to start off with kombucha, and if you're to buy your own SCOBY with your juices. So I'm going to put this away, and then I'm going to get back into my next batch. Alright, at the beginning of the video, we ended up taking 2 cups out of this first fermentation and putting it aside in this bowl here. Now what you're going to do is put this back in here, and that's going to be your starter fluid or starter juice for your next first fermentation. In here I have the tea that's been steeping for about 10 minutes. I'm going to give it a quick stir in there just to make sure that all the sugar has dissolved in there, and you need the sugar obviously in there to for the yeast to feed off of. So give it a good stir like this. Make sure all the sugar is dissolved, you don't see anything at the bottom, anything like that. Once it's done, I like to use a cheesecloth over this and strain this back into this jar. So I'll use the same cheesecloth that I used to strain out the juices that were in here. I'll pour it right through. Alright, once you've filtered out all your tea into the jar here, I like to add cold water now. Some people will tell you need to do it all with hot water. However, I've done it like this. It helps reduce the time that I have to wait for the tea to come back to room temperature before I put my SCOBY back in. Alright, adding the cold water in. So I'll need probably about 2 and a bit of these cups. And a bit. Now the key to adding the cold water in here is you don't want to, again, fill this to the top, and it's not for the carbonation side of things. It's actually to get the SCOBY to have room inside your jar. So I like to fill it just before the jar actually starts to narrow. That way the SCOBY has full surface area to sit on top and do its thing. So before I put the SCOBY in there, you'll feel the jar is still warm even after adding the cold water in there. And I like to give it a couple hours now to cool down, come back to room temperature. Say even 25, 26 would be still reasonable to put the SCOBY back in there. And while I do wait, I still put the cheesecloth in there because you know, in a couple hours you never know what's happening in the house, and you don't want any contaminants getting inside. So I'll be back and to show you the last step before I put it away for the next 10 days. Alright, once you're done letting this come down to room temperature, all you do is you take your SCOBY. I'm going to leave both of them in there at this time and put it in there. And once you toss it in there, it may float to the top, may go down to the bottom. Both are fine. Eventually it'll stay up to the top. And now all you do is cover it back up with your cheesecloth and put it in a dark room for about 6 to 10 days. I prefer 10 days. It all depends on how bitter you like it. Anyways, hopefully you got some good info out of this. If you have any questions, comments, please leave them in the comments box down below, and we'll go from there. Check in on the next one.